Hi, my name is Sydney Carter, and today I'm going to talk to you guys about the Heian period, which was an imperial time in Japan that is very famous for its art, poetry, and literature. But we're going to focus on my favorite parts, the poetry and the literature. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So, the Heian period was a period of imperial and classical reign in Japan that occurred from 795 to 1185 AD. It's the period that occurred when religions such as Buddhism were at its highest, as well as the imperial court. This particular period is known for its powerful reigning family, the Fujiwara clan. Here's a map of Japan during the Heian period. In the middle, you'll find Kyoto, which was the capital of Heian Japan. And the Emperor Kamui of the Fujiwara clan actually had the capital move there after the Nara period ended to benefit his family's own political agenda. He and his family were in power for years before he died, and his sons lost their family the throne because they were fighting over who was going to succeed their father. Emperor Kamui died in 806. Shortly after, the Soga clan had taken control of the throne from his sons, but not for long. The Fujiwara clan remained prominent political figures in Heian Japan and married themselves into the imperial family and obtained absolute control of the court about 200 years later. Something really cool that was a big deal in Heian Japan were ladies of the court, considered in today's society concubines, to put it nicely. They are women of service. These women of the court, they did everything around the capital, from feeding, cleaning, styling, performing, to sleeping with the emperor himself, obviously, or anyone he felt needed their services. But there's a lot more to them than just that, but we'll get to that later. They wore flamboyant but modest robes, technically called kimonos, and maintained a face dressed with makeup at all times. This job, if you want to call it that, was a very honorable position for women that were considered lower or middle class back then, and their parents usually worked their butts off their whole lives in order to get a good enough standing with the court to even have their daughters considered by the emperor for the job. These women were having extremely memorable, passionate, emotional, and unbelievable experiences during their time as women of the Heian court. But some of them were more than just women that performed special services. They had certain talents that weren't just pleasurable to the body, but to the mind as well. Their experiences as women of the court influenced their lives and their art, and for some, it led them to be considered artistic and literary legends in today's society. These legendary Heian women were mostly famous for creating Japanese love poems that were heavily influenced by their experiences as the emperor's concubines. In a book that we'll talk about later, it says that the poetry of Japan has its seeds in the human heart and mind and grows into the myriad of leaves of words. Because people experience many different phenomena in this world, they express that which they think and feel in their hearts in terms of all that they see and hear, which I think is a really good definition of what we're going to talk about today. So the most famous of their literary feats were their tanka poems, a form of poetry exclusive to Japan. Tanka poems are usually no more than 31 syllables and written in single unbroken line. Tanka translates to short song. And regarding these talented women of service, tanka poems were used to tell their stories of romance, passion, heartbreak, and courtship, and they were usually written right after said incidents occurred. These poems were written by the women of the Heian court, and they used a lot of natural and personal aspects of the writer and the writer's environment as symbolism. Nature, personal experience, and tragedy work together simultaneously to create the meaning behind these poems, which is fascinating because you don't usually think women who would be considered prostitutes today have those kinds of life-altering moments, but they do. Weather is also a really common symbol in these poems, but it's mostly used in poems that evoke intense negative emotions like depression, sadness, heartbreak, and in some cases, sexual withdrawals or arousal. Nature is the most prominent and symbolic feature of these Japanese love poems. Flowers and other types of flora are very common symbols in these love poems, and they represent a multitude of things. They are used to describe physical attributes of the writer's lovers, their feelings of losing a loved one, and what it felt like to be touched or spoken to by someone they had relations with. Our promiscuous writers use them to modestly describe events and happenings that should never be spoken of beyond the privacy of that moment. Ono Kamachi is one of today's most famous Tanka poets from back then. She was the first poet to come out of the beginning stages of the Fujiwara reign. She mostly wrote her poems about what we call now one-night stands and funny things that followed those events. And yes, her poems are beautiful and entertaining, but they aren't as deep as some of the other famous Tanka poetesses. Another famous Tanka poet is Izumi Shikibu. Izumi was a poet that came out of the latter stages of the Fujiwara Japan, and her poems are absolutely beautiful and moving. She wrote about short-lived relations, but mostly wrote about her romance and passion that she experienced while having an affair with Prince Atsumichi, his death, and the death of her younger daughter, Naishi. Muraki Shikibu, referred to as Lady Shikibu, wrote poems, but is mostly known for her book, The Tale of Genji. The Tale of Genji is about a man named Genji, obviously, and it talks about his love life, troubles, success, and despair, blah, 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 blah. Muraki Shikibu and Izumi Shikibu are actually thought to be women of the Heian court during the same time, which is pretty cool. So the tale of Genji embodies a generational decline, which is symbolized through the life of Genji, and is considered one of the greatest works of foreign historical literature to this day. Another book written by someone we've talked about, The Ink Dark Moon, is a book of Tanka poems written by Ono Kamachi and Izumi Shikibu, but the book is made up mostly of Izumi Shikibu's work, seeing as it features a small collection of poems written after the death of her daughter Naishi, some of the poetic letters she wrote to Prince Atsumichi after his death, and the last poem she wrote before her own death. She also wrote a diary that was barely published and is selling for like $200 to $300 on Amazon and other retail websites. It contains a full set of the Prince Atsumichi letters and almost every other poem written by her. My parents promised to get it for me as a graduation present, so fingers crossed I get it.